Hello, and welcome to the podcast commentary of episode 11, Colonial Day. I am Ronald D Moore, the executive producer and creator of the new Battlestar Galactica. And tonight we're going to be talking about the 11th episode in the first season, Colonial Day. This was essentially began life as our West Wing episode. And we'd always sort of wanted to do an episode that really took place in Laura Roslin's world, and really dealt with sort of the politics of the fleet and Galactica and the people and the survivors of the human race, and sort of how that would evolve over the course of the series. As I was developing the show early on and sort of setting up the major players, I felt very strongly that the president should be a very important player in the show. In the original Battlestar Galactica, there was a Quorum of 12, which is reprised in this episode, of political leaders of the 12 colonies, which, before the attack of the Cylons in the original Galactica, the Quorum of 12 was sort of the political, quasi-military leadership of the 12 colonies. Before we delve further into that, because I tend to digress a lot in these, as long-time listeners will know, this is Cloud 9, which is actually the college at BC University. We definitely wanted to get outside of Galactica, go explore another ship in the fleet, and we decided that if we had at least one vessel that sort of was set up in some sort of arboretum-type setting that had a dome on it, that, a place where you could create or that had recreated some sort of Earth-like or colony-like exterior, that would be a nice place to open the show up. It keeps the show from getting too claustrophobic, but it prevents it, or it allows us to stay within the fleet instead of having to sort of go and make up the colony of the planet of the week idea, which I was very much opposed to doing. I from the get-go, I didn't want the show to be about going to alien worlds constantly that happen to look like Canada. I wanted to essentially use Caprica, the storyline in Caprica, to be location-driven in Vancouver, and that we would be essentially saying that Caprica looks an awful lot like Vancouver. But as far as other planets, I think it starts to beg credibility at a certain point when all the planets in the universe look like Canada. So I'd never really wanted to go to other planets in the series, and I definitely didn't want to explore other aliens. And so the idea of having at least one ship within our ragtag fleet that had a certain sort of exterior feel to it allows us to sort of have it both ways. We can go outside, we can do some episodes like this where the characters get to go outside and be in the trees and give a sort of a different visual sense without it really breaking the reality of what we had set up so far. And there are the sirens and the dogs, which I'm sure you've all come to know and love in my little home here in Altadena, California. And I'm yeah, isn't it great? There they go. Public services, my tax dollars at work. In any case, the West Wing episode was something that we had talked about from the very, very earliest going. I always wanted to do something that was more political, that dealt with the sort of practical realities of trying to govern and run a society that had, or run the remnants of a society that had just been destroyed. And unlike the original series, I didn't want the political leadership of our ragtag fleet to really be straw men for Adama to knock down over and over again, because that was essentially the dynamic that developed in the original series. The Quorum of 12 would come up with some lame-brained idea, hey, let's go make peace with the Cylons, or hey, let's stay here on this planet where obviously the Cylons are going to come in 5 minutes. And then Adama, being wiser and smarter, would always find a way to beat them, and cooler heads would prevail, and Adama and Apollo would save the day. I didn't really want to do that because I didn't like the message of it. I didn't like the notion that, well, what you really need is just a good, smart military man who can control and run everything. I just didn't like that. I liked playing the sort of the natural tension between the civilian and the military authority in the situation. I wanted to really explore what it meant to be a democracy in these circumstances and a republican form of government in these circumstances. And I thought it also says something interesting about the society, the colonial society, that they do value and treasure and place great emphasis on the fact that their government is still with them. I mean, the entire sort of Laura Roslin plot line throughout the series is really a tribute to the fact of how strongly these people believe in their system of government, how fundamental the notions of democracy and representation and the vote and equal rights and the sort of things that in this country, in the United States, are sort of also built into our culture. We have this sort of fundamental belief in the Constitution, this fundamental belief in the Bill of Rights, and there's arguing around the margins of it, but we have this sort of undeniable belief system. I wanted the Ragtag Fleet and, in essence, their society to mirror our society in that way, but then I wanted an ability to test all of those assumptions. I wanted this circumstance and this set of problems to continually challenge and really provoke those ideas. I was talking a moment ago about how I wanted the situation that the colonial survivors find themselves in to really challenge and provoke their notions of society and freedom. And I think that idea of, a situation that is so dire, that is so fraught with peril, that puts at risk the very nature of existence, is an interesting one, and how it tests the system of governments and governance and the sort of social rules that people operate in. That idea, that sort of challenge to the fundamentals of the system, is something that I think we're going through right now. I think that the situation in this country, the war on terrorism, the assertion of executive power in all circumstances, the sort of the march, the long march toward extreme authoritarian sort of governance has sort of begun in this country, and the idea of how we fight back against that, or what are the places that we choose to fight back, and what are the places that we choose not to fight back. What are the places, what are the sort of areas of our society today and our culture are we willing to hand over to security? Are we willing to give up freedoms in which areas in order to provide security? I think those ideas are in the show because those ideas are in the culture right now. Back to the show on screen here, this sequence of Kara and Lee sort of getting on cloud nine and just relaxing and stopping to literally smell the roses, as it were, used to be a pool. In the first draft there was a scripted, there was a large pool that also opened the show. There were people diving into the pool because it was sort of like Cloud Nine was sort of like a cruise ship and banquet facility and convention meeting place and so on originally before the Holocaust. And in this sequence, instead of her spraying him with the hose, which she's about to do here, we had Kara just stripping off her clothes and going skinny dipping, and Lee sort of being scandalized by it, but then jumping in as well, because we wanted to just give them a moment. It's like give these guys a break. They've had a long, difficult season 2, and it just felt like, okay, now they're standing out there. It looks beautiful. It is beautiful. Let them enjoy themselves and have a little bit of fun. This is the lead up to the meeting. I mean, all of these sort of security things, the screeners, the Marine Guards, the sort of procedures that you see them following, they are intended to be redolent of the familiar security procedures that travelers and people going to various meetings have to experience today. Again, the notion here is to have this mirror our society. We're not trying to create a new, cool, spacey, weird society. This is a recognizable place. This is with recognizable customs and functions, because we're trying to sort of convey a certain idea here, and we want you to think about the ideas and sort of enjoy the drama rather than really being distracted by some of the trappings of what the genre sometimes brings. This whole little bit of business, well, not here, but what we're leading up to, the bit of business with Zarek and will Laura Roslin shake Zarek's hand in public, is sort of inspired by when Yasser Arafat came to the White House for the meeting with Yitzhak Rabin to sign the Oslo Accords, there was a lot of speculation whether Rabin would actually shake the hand of Arafat, and the symbolism of that and what it entailed, and the sort of carefully choreographed maneuver where Clinton sort of got the two men to shake in the famous photograph and video on the White House lawn. I always liked that. There was something interesting about just the symbolism of a handshake, what it says, how it conveys. So I made this whole little bit of business of Zarek come up and and Ty won't shake his hand, and Ellen, who's becoming a little bit more of a player and a little bit more cunning, decides to shake his hand and get her picture everywhere, and that that it would make news, and that it would sort of start to advance her agenda, which we start to learn is a separate agenda from everybody else. Again, Ellen is her own person, her own players. Ellen is a survivor. Ellen, in a literal sense, and in a larger sense, Ellen is somebody who's going to find a way, somehow, some way to survive and keep moving up the ladder, and she sees him as a possible way up that ladder. Just a side note about media, because this is certainly the show that features media more than any other in the series. It's a bit of a push, frankly. We're pushing sort of what I think is the reality of the show slightly to sort of make it feel a little bit more familiar and a little easier to play. We established in the miniseries that there was a group of reporters and press aboard Galactica for its decommissioning ceremony. And presumably a lot of them, were either on Laura Roslin's transport or were, left behind aboard Galactica. In any case, there was definitely a press contingent that survived the initial Cylon Holocaust. So I didn't think it was straining credulity too far to say that they would continue to function in those roles. I mean, what else would they do? They're media people, they're experienced broadcasters and journalists, and they would presumably try to cover the events that are happening around them. I think there might be a little bit too many of them in some cases, and perhaps sometimes we stretch a point to sort of give ourselves a sense of a press corps, because we're trying to convey a certain feeling of politics and certain sort of importance of the White House. It's to sort of like root you in what the archetypes are supposed to be. But more or less, I think it plays fairly real. Again, this is another location at the University of British Columbia, where the Quorum of 12 is meeting. As I started to talk about earlier, the Quorum of 12 is an idea that was in the original series. The Quorum of 12, I never quite figured out exactly how you got in the Quorum of 12. There seemed to be an implication in the original series that Adama was a member of the Quorum, and I'm not sure if other commanders of Battlestars were, or if Adama was unique. I'm sure there's fans of the original series who might have a better answer for that than I do. My impression from watching the pilot and the episodes was that the Quorum seemed to represent each of the 12 colonies, and there didn't seem to be a determinant of how one got to the Quorum or exactly what its powers were. It seemed to be sort of a large sort of grand council, as it were, which is a very familiar science fiction riff. Frankly, that happens a lot. Happens a lot in Star Trek. In Trek, there were many occasions in which you would encounter an alien society, and essentially, instead of sort of trying to stroke out the complexities of its government and do a bicameral legislature and the judiciary and how the executive devolves and blah 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 blah, you would essentially say, well, there's the Supreme Council, or there's the Ground Council, or there's the whatever they were called. There was some body that usually sat around on tables and nodded a lot because they were mostly extras, and then there would be the leader of the council, and that's how you typically dealt with alien cultures. Galactica has a similar sort of riff in the original. There is this quorum. Makes sense. There's 12. They seem to be some kind of Senate, I guess would be the closest sort of approximation that you could run to. In the new series, the way I've started to sort of construct the government was that the Quorum of 12 is, somewhere between the Senate and a cabinet. There seems to be, or I guess it can't be the cabinet, I take that back. It's essentially some kind of glorified Senate. Each of them represents their colony, which gives them a massive amount of power. There's one person per colony in this setup, so the Quorum would have a tremendous amount of say. The rules of voting, is there a filibuster? Does it take a simple majority to pass things? In this episode, it takes a simple majority to elect a vice president. Does it take a supermajority to pass constitutional amendments, or et cetera, et cetera? There's lots of sort of detail work to sort of go on at some point. But again, I really wanted to play the reality of what they would have to go through. Laura can't run the entire civilian fleet by herself. Any sort of society needs some sort of governmental construct. It needs some sort of bureaucracy. It needs some sort of like designated hitters for education and security, etc., etc. There are anarchists listening to this right now, I'm sure, who will argue that point. This episode, I also wanted to start to get into the fact that the colonies, or the colonists, the survivors, are not just sort of nameless, faceless, and all think the same thing. There are divisions. There are colonies, or survivors of colonies, who believe one thing. There are survivors who believe something else. Laura Roslin is not the perfect leader. She is not the most popular president they've ever had. She has never even been elected to this post. So she's not, I think, someone who holds the post by acclamation. She's somebody who holds the post because everybody ahead of her in the line of succession died. And I think that gives her a certain her hold on power is a bit tenuous as a result. A fair question that comes up is, why hasn't Laura designated a vice president well before now? I think that is a fair question. Mary McDonald asked me the same question. And I think the answer is simply that there hasn't been a whole hell of a lot of time. I mean, since the Holocaust until this episode is really only a matter of weeks, and they have had a lot on their plates. There's been a tremendous amount has happened to these people in a very short amount of time. She's only now starting to get to the point where she can even think about putting a government together to convene a quorum, to establish a bureaucracy, to try to bring some order to the chaos of the refugee flight into the stars. So I don't think it's pushing things too far to say that they haven't had an actual vice president until now. I mean, what would have been, in practical terms, what would have been her legal authority to appoint a vice president if their system of government says that it has to be nominated and approved by the quorum in this kind of circumstance? Presumably the vice president was elected by the people under normal circumstances, and then if everybody else is dead and the vice, much like when Spiro Agnew resigned as vice president, in the early 70s, Nixon nominated Gerald Ford, and he was confirmed by I think the House. I'm not positive if it was both houses of Congress or not, but in essence he was confirmed. So I wanted a similar kind of deal. This sequence to me is one of the more interesting in the show because of the ideas that are present in it. Not just Tom Zarek and his agenda being one, they'll talk about in a moment, but also what it says about the fleet. I mean, think about what's happening throughout these ships. Here are all these survivors. They're all stuck in these vessels. They ran away. They're all happy to be alive. They're all scrabbling in sort of a day-to-day existence. Conditions vary widely on all these ships. And what do? What are they doing with their time? This is sort of shining a light on one of the conceits of the show, which is that everybody on a ship like this would continue to do their jobs. I mean, why is this guy continuing to be a gardener? Why are the bartenders continuing to be bartenders? I mean, he's bringing up a valid point. These people are all in some way living a fantasy. They are all sort of trying to maintain sort of the veneer of the world that they once lost, which I think is a really interesting idea. And I think it's emotionally true. I think that they would try to hang on to their past lives. The journalists all want to behave like journalists. They don't want to have to start, digging and or not even digging, creating hydroponic plants and, becoming laborers and all this. I mean, whether that's practical or not, and it may not be practical at a certain point, I think that their initial impulses and their initial sort of instincts would drive them towards continuing their old professions, continuing their old lives, and trying to hang on to what they had as best as possible. I mean, even here at Cloud 9, they're still going to the bar and hanging out, and they're still sort of behaving much like they would have behaved back home. And yet home is gone, and none of that's real. This whole subplot that is illuminated here with the building sort of assassination attempt on Laura Roslin, with that was established early in the tease with the man assembling the gun and smuggling it through security, and now we've got this guy, and I mean the show initially was wanted to be just the West Wing. So let's do just a political show, make the stakes Laura's position, make the stakes democracy and all that. And I think that there came a point where that grew unsatisfying, and we felt like we needed a little something else. It is Battlestar Galactica. There is a certain sort of tension and jeopardy component to the show. So now we have the bar fight, and we have this sort of underlying tension between. I apologize for the dogs that are going crazy. I'll shut the window. I hope it doesn't bother too many of you, and I hope that the rest of you are dog lovers. In any case, the feeling was we needed a little something else, a little more juice in the show. So there was this sort of underlying plot that may or may not be attached to Tom Zarek, as he seems to be manipulating events and possibly getting ready to assassinate the president. I think that, as far as it goes, it works. I think it delivers sort of the tension and the jeopardy beats when you need them structurally in the script. I'm not sure that it's entirely successful. I laid most of that blame to myself because I'm the head writer, and I sort of construct these things and guide them through the process. I don't know that I ever really solved the problem of balancing the political and the sort of jeopardy in this episode. I think that the jeopardy starts to take over here, and you feel like we're really going somewhere. I'll be back in a moment. Like I was saying before, now we're back on Caprica, of course. And before, let's just put off talking about Caprica for the moment. The jeopardy component of Colonial Day, I don't think it's entirely satisfying. I know I wasn't quite ever satisfied with it. It's never really a full-blown assassination attempt. We never have the sniper rifle or weapon, with Laura in the crosshairs, and you're building the tension of will they get to the sniper before he pulls the trigger, or will Lee knock her down. We never really play any of that because I didn't really want to. I didn't really want to play that. I just felt like that was a little too easy. It was a little too predictable, and I didn't find a lot in that really interested me personally. And yet, I did acknowledge that there was a need for some kind of jeopardy and tension in the show beyond the political, so I sort of went with the assassination thing to an extent. And I think that in overall feeling, the episode kind of falls between two ideas a little bit. I think I really like the Laura story. I love Mary in the show. I'm really involved and intrigued with the political dynamics of it. But the politics of it never quite it never becomes quite dire enough to sustain it. The political situation takes a while to set up. It's a lot of complicated ideas. There's maneuverings back and forth. And I never found a way to really make that story so dynamic and so intriguing and so fraught with jeopardy and tension that you felt like you didn't need anything else. And yet the assassination story is never it's never in the line of fire or something. It's like I said, you never look through the crosshairs of the sniper, and you're never really playing that all the way either. So I think the episode is a little soft as a result. It never quite becomes a barn burner of an episode. All that said, it has some of my favorite bits in it. I mean, I really like this storyline in Caprica. I think it's satisfying and it moves the Caprica storyline along quickly. I like the performances a lot in this episode. I really like the direction. This was directed by a friend of mine, Jay Pate, who him and his brother Josh were the creators and showrunners behind a little show that I worked on briefly called G versus E, or Good versus Evil, which is how I came to meet my partner David Icke. And that show used to be on USA, then it migrated to the Sci-Fi Channel. Only lasted really one season, but it was great. It was just a great episode. They were really, really smart, young, very young directors and writers. And this episode, I think, works in large measure because of the work that Jay did on it. I think he brings a lot of tension to these scenes. He really knew how to shoot. Like I said, what was not, the greatest assassination conspiracy show, and he kind of gives it a lot of life, and I think that these scenes work as a result of the director elevating the material and the actors also elevating the material within it. All this stuff is all fairly straight ahead. It's the interrogation scene. You've seen riffs on this for years and years and years. This works because Jay makes it work. He knows where to put the camera. He knows when to go to people. It's edited well. And you've got three good actors in the room. I mean, this little bit with Carr is tremendous. The wink, adding the right sort of note of cynicism and jeopardy into the scene. I didn't get to comment on the fact that Jamie threw that briefcase across the room. That's completely his own doing. It's just like we were watching dailies, and Jamie picks up the briefcase and flings it across the room, and I just love that. So he kept it in the show because Jamie really can go for it. There's a lot bottled up inside Lee Adama, which I think is fascinating because on the surface, you don't think that Lee is a violent person or that Lee really could explode. And then in the moments when we let Jamie cut loose with the character, you really do, your head kind of snaps back a little bit and you go, whoa. This little beat here and the later beats that are coming up between Laura and Gray illuminate another part of the character that I'm really fond of, which is that Laura Roslin, who was the Secretary of Education and seemingly a very genteel, a very quiet woman who had, liked to stay behind the scenes, never wanted to run for office, but had been around politics for quite a while, had been in the office of the president for quite a while, had been in the mayor's office, and knew how to throw elbows and knows what to do, and that Laura, when push comes to shove, will shove you, and that she shoves Gray out the door is, in keeping with the same character that put that Cylon out the airlock. I mean, I think Laura says a lot of good things, and Laura believes a lot of things that she says about freedom and about right and wrong, and she's a very idealistic person, but she's very, very practical and pragmatic. I think she's a pragmatist first. I think one of the interesting things about her vis-a-vis Adama is that Adama really is an idealist. Adama is this warhorse military leader who is going into retirement and who has dealt with the practical realities of men and women in combat. And you would think that would make him almost cynical. But I think Adama is a bit of an idealist. I think he believes in things, the Articles of Colonization, which is their version of the Constitution, and whatever their Bill of Rights is, and those sort of ideas of freedom and democracy and liberty. I think Adama believes in those things passionately. I think Laura believes in them, but Laura is a pragmatist first. Laura gets things done. Laura figures out how to accomplish, how A leads to B leads to C. And I think that who Laura was before the Holocaust, I think Laura was a quiet person. I think she kept to herself a lot. We've established that she took care of her mother as her mother was dying of cancer, which was, I think if you think of Laura as a caregiver who had to function in that role and also be a public figure, I think you realize that this is a woman who led a very solitary, very internal existence. And then, the world ends on the same day that she finds out she has cancer, and she's elevated into the presidency. And I think that that's a fascinating story. I think that in many ways you could argue that Laura Roslin's life began on the day that the world ended. That before that moment, she was somebody who was living sort of a shadow life. And then in one fell swoop, she's made, aware of her own mortality in a very real way, and she's given responsibility for literally the human race. And I think she came alive through that process in a way that she may never have come alive if she had just continued about her daily work back as the Secretary of Education. I think she's come into her own as the president. I think she's started to sort of fulfill her own potential in ways that she probably never would if fate had not handed this to her. This whole thing is sort of a callback to the pilot. In the pilot, Baltar's initial scene, his introduction scene, was him doing a television interview. And in that moment, we saw that he was a very media-friendly person. He knew how to sort of play to the camera, and he enjoys it. He likes the limelight. And this sequence is all about Laura, hearing it over the radio and realizing that that's a guy who knows how to stir people's emotions. That's a guy who people will flock to, rally to, then I can use that guy. It's all about using him. I think she does not trust him completely. It's like, I think after the events of 6 Degrees of Separation, in which he was accused and then exonerated of being a traitor, I don't think she's ever forgotten that. But Laura, above all else, is a pragmatist. She has a real problem right now. She's about to lose the vice presidency to Tom Zarek, and she needs somebody else. And here's Baltar. Here's a guy that could win the vote, who she has doubts about his motives, but he's got to be better than Zarek, and she's willing to pull that trigger and make that decision. And I think not all of her, sometimes her decisions aren't the right ones. I mean, maybe this decision to pull in Baltar here will ultimately come back and bite her on the ass, but you've got to deal with the problem when you deal with it, As the Secretary of Defense says, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army you wish you have. I think this whole beat coming up of her, cutting off. Is this cut directly? See, now it's been a while since I've seen the episode. I'm not even sure where we're cutting to. We're either cutting to the back to Gray, or we're going back to Galactica. Okay, we're going to Gray. That particular shot, for some reason, just because of that pole in the background and the way it's lit, it always feels like they're walking on the mall in Washington, D.C., which is perfect to me. The quality of the light, the landscape, it just sort of looks sort of like the Washington Monument back there. And it's perfect in my mind because it really sort of roots you in this familiar environment. Again, it's evoking Washington. It's evoking, the nation's capital without being literal about it. And this is the scene where the things I just said about her ability to cut people off and stab them in the back if necessary really comes to the forefront, and it's kind of sad. I mean, she does she jettisons her friend. She jettisons somebody that was valuable and good to her and helped her and the rest of the people immensely. This is one of my favorite scenes in the whole series. Is Laura going into the bathroom to deal with Baltar. I mean, we have had more bathrooms in this series than probably all of the rest of science fiction combined, which I'm sure gives us some kind of distinction, and maybe we'll win an award. The relationship between these two is not an easy one. I think it's complicated. She's relied on him. She's trusted him. She's started to be suspicious of him. She's started to wonder what he's about. She doesn't know if she can entirely trust him. But again, she'll turn to him in a time of crisis because, well, who's the other logical candidate? There isn't one. So you go with this guy. You go with the devil you know, as she says later. And I think we've also been very careful. If you watch the show carefully, you'll see that Baltar, while we, the audience, know he's talking to, number 6 all the time and having all these wacky fantasies, there's very little that he actually gives away to the rest of the people around him. He generally, and most of this is a tribute to how James plays the character. If you really examine it, he doesn't give very much away to the other people at all. They might think he's a little strange, a little odd, but he doesn't really talk to himself that often. And on the few times he's been caught, like there was a moment when I think Dwala came and got him and he was talking, and she kind of looks at him oddly, and he just kind of says, yeah, I was talking to myself. I talked to myself, okay? And he kind of carries it off. So I don't think it's a case where everyone around him would be looking at Baltar going, he's insane, he talks to thin air. We've always been very careful to sort of hide that aspect. And he has other character things too. He's not just a guy that deals with number 6. He's also the guy that would get Playa to come out to be in that bathroom stall, which I love. I love the fact that he is still on the make, even in this environment. That 6 gives him permission, and that he's able to pursue other women, and that he's able to pull it off. I love this shot of him going back into the stall. That's just so perfect to me. I just think it's true to the character. I think that's still who Baltar is. This is an interesting scene because this was actually shot several weeks after the episode was complete. The episode was done. We were slightly short. We're not usually short on episodes. Typically, we're too long. This episode ran a little bit short, but we could have made it work. This came in because when we watched the initial cuts of the show and the director watched the initial cuts, everybody kind of had the same reaction, which was we wish there was more in the assassination story or a little bit more along that line, something to just remind you of the danger. So I wrote this scene very late in the game in the middle of shooting Cobalt's Last Gleaming, which sort of touches on the the danger that, hey, there could still be an assassination thing going on. Don't forget about that. But then I actually thought what to me made the scene worth doing and worth shooting was that little business with the uniform and her saying she cleans up good sometimes and him saying, yeah, right, whatever. Because we have the scene coming up where you're going to see Starbuck in this dress. And in the cut, it just sort of came out of nowhere. In the first cut, it came out of nowhere. She just sort of appears at the final reception in this dress, which is a great moment and all. But it just seemed to come out of nowhere. Like, why would she do that? And why is it with Lee? And there hadn't been any intimation of that. So I used that little, when I had the chance to go back in and write an extra scene, I wanted to use it to serve two masters, to sort of touch on the assassination story one more time, and also to sort of set up the ending. Because what's also happening in this show is the sort of the subplots of Baltar and his interest in women in general and in Kara specifically, and the sort of budding sort of are they or aren't they kind of interest between Lee and Kara, which you kind of knew we were going to do eventually, but I was always reticent to do and always wanted to be careful how we went in that territory, if we went in that territory at all. And where this leads into the next episode, into Cobalt's Last Gleaming, is quite interesting in my opinion. Love this whole sequence. When you watch this in the editing bay in the first director's cut, they put in temp music, and for temp tracks, as they're called, editors put in music from all kinds of places, CDs, other soundtracks, whatever. His entrance here, as soon as the lights came on and everybody started applauding, they temped it in with "Fly me to the moon and let me swing among the stars." It was so great. I laughed and loved it, and we kept it in the temp track until somebody just said, "Oh, come on, you can't really play "Fly Me to the Moon," can you?" And there is a part of me that wanted to just play "Fly Me to the Moon," to be honest, because I think there's larger ideas within the show that there's Kara and her dress. There's larger ideas in the show that we're starting to explore more and more. This notion of all this has happened before and all of this has happened again, and inherent in that idea is a sense of cycle, that things are cycled back through, that all of the events that you're watching out now have played themselves out many times before in various guises with various players, and that things would start to be the same, that certain ideas, concepts, words, language would maybe not be the same in each iteration of the cycle, but might crop up again and again. That perhaps they do wear suits and ties, and maybe the next time they wear togas, and maybe next on some later version there is a version of "Fly Me to the Moon" floating out there in the society. And what's the connection between this culture and what's established in this culture and our own? What happens on Earth? Well, that's all remains to be seen. You'll have to watch the rest of the series to get all of that. But I wasn't completely opposed to the idea of "Fly Me to the Moon" in this episode, because I think you can go there with this series. I think you can start to play things that are familiar and interesting and mysterious, and let the audience start to wonder what the connections are. Because there is a connection. There is definitely a connection between all these events and Earth events. And I think that's part of what makes the series fascinating, is trying to sort of divine what those connections are and where they're going. This little bit at the end is just sort of one of the few times that we ever sort of see the cast and the characters just kind of relaxing and letting down their hair and certainly having a celebratory moment. And it felt right. It's like, okay, we've been through this long trauma of the season. Now they've had a political thing and nearly an assassination. Let them enjoy themselves. It's Colonial Day. I mean, it's their 4th of July. And if they can't celebrate and try to relax on this one day, then they really never are. And I never saw the series that way. I never saw that it would be so bleak and so desperate and so unpleasant a place that they could never smile and they could never relax. It's all about context, and it's about when you decide to do that. This little beat here is kind of interesting because there's there's sort of a natural inclination on some level to try to build a budding relationship or romance between Laura and Adama. I mean, they're the two leads, and their positions make them unique, and you can't imagine them being with anybody else in the fleet. So, you start wondering whether you'll ever hook them up together. There you can see kind of Baltar and Starbuck having their thing. This is as close as I wanted to get. This is sort of like they are a man and a woman, and they are both attractive, intelligent, smart people with a lot of strength, and on some level that has to attract each of them to the other, if in just a very slight way. So let's give them a moment where, just for a moment, the president and the commander actually go and have a dance, and they play it beautifully. I mean, look at the look on Eddie's face, and look at Mary. I mean, it's just, there's such an interesting, nice level of comfort to this moment, especially given what's going to happen in the next episode. All of this is like, all of these sort of nice, good feelings are because in the next episode things go very bad for all these people, and I wanted to sort of set that table a little bit. I wanted you to see them. This is sort of the world that might be, and how happy they are, the night before the next stage of the story, which is fast approaching, and things are never going to quite be the same for any of them after the events of the next two episodes, Cobal's Last Gleaming 1 and 2. This relationship between Ellen and Ty, and what she wants out of him, and what she hopes to be, and what he can be, and what he wants to be, are things that we are exploring in the very first couple episodes of the second season, which we're working on right now. In fact, as I sit here recording this, we're in prep on the first two episodes of the second season, which will be a two-part episode to open the season with. Here we are back on Caprica, and this is where it all kind of comes to a head. Hilo's been with Sharon this entire journey. He has accepted her as Sharon. I mean, why wouldn't he? He's seen some strange things. He's seen that there are at least clones or doubles or something weird of humanoids out there. That the blonde number 6 has appeared more than once, and that got his attention. That's the new heavy raider in the background, by the way, as opposed to the more conventional raider that Lycara captured. That one we call the heavy raider. But until this point, Hilo has never really questioned whether the woman he's with is really Sharon. He knows that the Cylons are up to something strange. I mean, what is all this? I mean, their sort of ostensible explanation is that they're cloning people, is sort of what Sharon said, just to get him to not think about the fact that maybe the Cylons look like people, that they could look like her, because she certainly didn't want him to think that. At this point, Sharon has been on her own. God, I apologize for the dogs going crazy. At this point, Sharon has been on her own agenda, trying to help Hilo get off the planet because she has developed real feelings for him, and that was not part of the plan. It was never part of the plan for Sharon to develop actual feelings for Hilo. And this is the moment of truth. He looks up, and wait a minute. Oh my God. How could this be? Bang, bang. It's always nice to squib people and watch their chests explode. It's one of the fun things about doing film and television. Love that shot. That's like a great, great shot. This was all very complicated in editing. Flashing back, sort of reminding you of the journey he's been on as he puts the pieces together. This was just one of those things because on the day when they were shooting this, they were very pressed for time. You can see they're losing the light. They were losing the location. Time was at a premium, and they just didn't have a lot of time to do a lot of shots. So we had to create a lot of this sort of ending in the editing room. And I love this last moment of Sharon. Okay, and that's the end of Colonial Day. I hope you enjoyed it. And, of course, the dogs have stopped barking now that the show is over. And next time, I will be taking you through Cobal's Last Gleaming, the finale of the season. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about upcoming episodes, episodes that we're currently prepping for Season 2. And I will talk to you then. So thank you for listening.